Alright, little response video to Lord Humongous, and I noticed that, you know, there was some shopping links in there about the should hit the fan weapon, and then talking about knives, and one of the big cold steel knives for self-defense. So I got a couple of knives laying around here. I've just recently put some in a survival kit, but one of the things I wanted to address here is is that if you have knives for self-defense, you're talking about cutting people, right? You're talking about getting blood around, and that knife fights can be bloody. Okay, and I got cuts just from some work I was doing last night. I work nights, so I'm making this video at like 7 a.m. or something like that, and you know, getting cut is something that goes hand in hand with knife fighting. I've studied knife fighting for over 20 years. I've gotten good at training with knife fighting, but then whenever I get around to some kind of a training dojo or something like that, there's always some guy who's a little better at it. And it's a body mechanics art, and it's not necessarily a science, because there are different things with different people's anatomies and stuff like that going on. One of the things to understand about knife fighting techniques, and you know, the whole thing about cutting somebody is that this isn't necessarily in 2015. Anytime after the 1990s, we have to be really concerned with blood-borne diseases. Now, if you're out in the wild and you get attacked by a wild animal, okay, and it gets bloody and you get bloody, that kind of goes with the territory too. But there's reasons you may not have a firearm on you, or you may not be able to get to it quickly. If you think a person can cover 21 foot in a hurry, a hostile animal definitely can, and they can sneak up on you, okay? Bears, stuff like that, they can get up on you, and you know, you in a sleeping bag, that's kind of like a big burrito to a bear, okay? Especially grizzlies, polar bears, big animals. And in certain types of situations, you know, you might have to contend with that. The other thing to consider, though, on the blood-borne diseases is that if you, for whatever reason, are in the streets, in the refugee camp, especially if you're traveling overseas, Africa, okay, the Middle East to a lesser extent, Africa, big deal, the Amazon, big deal. You need to consider bludgeoning weapons to be your go-to choice in these types of situations. And you'll want a weapon that has some kind of standoff. You'll want something long, a baseball bat, axe handle, something that's got a little reach to it, something with a standoff, so that you're not getting blood splatter, let's say, in your eyes or in your mouth and your nose, or into another cut that you have. And so the romance and the skill and the dojo stuff on knife fighting does not take into account the diseases of the late 20th century. And that's where we have to really be careful with a lot of stuff, because if you don't have really good access to antibiotics, you probably shouldn't go anywhere near a knife fight. Now, when you see a lot of modern convicts fighting, you can see in some of these guys start wrapping their arms, they start wrapping themselves up with something. They don't want to get splattered with blood. And it's you'll see prison and jail guards put on gloves before they go into something. This is something to really consider when you're giving people advice to have knives for self-defense. You may like your martial arts instructor, you may like your dojo, you may think that these escrimen are these guys, they really know what they're doing. It's an art, it's a form of dance, it's a lot of skill involved with that type of stuff. But in the real world, as soon as blood starts splattering around, it's not just blood loss you got to think about in a knife fight, it's catching diseases. And diseases come from that blood, okay? It's high, you got to consider it to be toxic stuff. And that's something to consider when you're giving free advice on YouTube about knives for self-defense. It's really not going to be a go-to choice in a hit-the-fan situation, especially in sanitation and hygiene have gone downhill, or if you're in the types of situations where you might be dealing with street people, you might be dealing with scummy people, people who've been in unclean situations, whatever reason, You want standoff type stuff. You want chemical sprays if possible. Even firearms. You're going to be getting blood around. Is this something you really want? Is this something you want in a house or in your motorhome or in your other types of situations where do you want blood splatter? Is this a situation where it's contained or you're leaving or whatever? Blood splatter may not be a good thing. And so you really want to think about that before either giving advice or taking advice regarding knife fighting, regarding use of firearms indoors, a lot of types of situations where you really want to look at what your options are. And it's not just a question of lethality and use of force, but in the aftermath of the use of a particular type of weapon, how are you going to handle blood splatter if there's been a major knife fight? On the other hand, if you use a chemical weapon like mace or pepper gas or perhaps some little concoction that somebody's come up with, how can you flush the air out of the area or maybe have a gas mask handy or something like that. But you really want to think to alternatives to things which are going to spray a bunch of blood around, which itself can produce a real toxic problem.